virtual conference. I think this next session really lends into the conversations that we've just been having. We have with us Graeme Hunter. He is the local government people consulting partner at EY and has been leading research on the workforce of 2035. So what Graeme's going to do is share with colleagues the interim kind of findings in that research that they've conducted with PPMA members right across the country, looking at what the shape of the workforce needs to look like in 2035 and the challenges that we will all be facing getting there. I think we've heard some of those challenges now. There is still time also to contribute to that research. I would ask colleagues, if you haven't already done so, please, if there are things, particularly what Alexandra has just shared, that actually presents new challenges and difficulties, there are still opportunities to be involved in that research, and please do let us know so we can pass your details on to Graeme. The work is ongoing, and I'm sure we will find it, even the interim outcomes, extremely helpful. So I'm going to hand over now to Graeme Hunter. Thank you, Graeme. You're on mute. Thank you.
That's a classic error, isn't it? I'm trying to share my slides as well, so let me just do that and then we'll go. Can you see my screen? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Thank you, Sandra, for the intro, and thank you everyone for having me. I'm delighted to be here to talk about the research that we've been doing with PPMA colleagues on this topic. I guess if you went back to why we did this research, it largely happened because at a previous PPMA conference, I heard a statistic which said that there were 24% fewer people working in local government now than there were 10 years ago. And we all know the background to that, right? So austerity, budget cuts, pressure on costs, challenges in the service. And you on this call are living with the consequences of it, aren't you? So you're probably one of the 90% of councils that reports having a skills gap. You're probably one of the 94% that has problems with recruitment and retention. So the here and now is a challenging place. But as I was talking to Barry at that conference, we started to talk about the future, and I'm a natural optimist and a believer in local government. So I sort of wondered, if you look forward 10 years, could you deal with challenges in a structured way and get to a happier place in 2035 than you're in today? And could you address some of those things head on? So we set out to do some research to answer that question. We're kind of getting towards the end of that. Really grateful to those of you that have been part of it and contributed, either by doing the survey or by meeting with us one-to-one or being one of the round tables. But I wanted to share particularly some of the kind of areas to address and the themes coming out of that research today, if that's okay with you. I'm not planning to talk for a full half hour. I'm hoping that I give you a lot of time back to ask questions. And I'm going to try. There we go. So I guess as a starting point, who am I and why do I even care about this? So my day job is, as Sandra said, I'm the partner who leads our people consulting practice in EY for local government. And I specialize in that, in addressing challenges around the workforce. So how do we manage them better? How do we upskill them? How do we retain them? How do we recruit? All those kind of challenging questions. And if you roll back even further, I started my career in local government. And that was in a very different time, a time of best value reviews and times when councils had discretionary funds to put into culture projects to improve the local area. Do we all remember those? But the skills I learned working in local government are still the skills I use every day. So back in political awareness, cultural understanding, how do you write a report? How do you structure a proposal? How do you manage a team? All the things I learned back then. And the sector at its best has been a great place to work, to develop talent, to grow careers. And I would really love that to continue and to kind of think about how do we, as HR professionals, as people managing people, help that to happen over the next 10 years. So briefly, what I'm going to do is give you an overview of what we have done and the research questions we've looked at. I'm going to talk to you about the top 5 themes that are coming out of that. Hopefully, I'm going to give us a bit of time for discussion, and I'm going to talk about a bit about what happens next. And as Sandra said, spoiler, we'd love you to get involved if you haven't been so far. So if you've contributed to this, you will know this already. If you haven't, you maybe don't. So our challenge here was to understand what will happen to local government over the next 10 years, what the workforce will look like by 2035, actually 11 years, but we'll skip over that, and think about the kind of challenges you're going to go on that journey and what you have to do to deliver it. And we looked at it for 3 reasons, really. So one is looking at a longer time horizon just gives us the chance to look beyond the current political cycle. We wanted at the time to look beyond 2 election cycles, it turns out, because we didn't quite predict what was going to happen with Rishi's announcement, but it's probably more like 3. But take you out that kind of short-term cycle, look long-term, break up the politics, think about where you want to be. And we wanted to kind of get out of the current challenges facing you. Although, as you'll see in the theme, some of those current challenges are very much seen as persistent things that will continue through those 10 years. We wanted to look at the skills, capabilities, and structures that will be needed to achieve the vision for local government in the future. And we want to think about how PPA members across organisations might work together to address some of those biggest challenges. So what we've done is a series of one-to-one interviews with people at strategic leadership level. We've done a roundtable in London. We're still hoping that we could do another couple. If you're interested in different regions, please get in touch. And we've done an online survey that got a reasonable response rate back. So we are kind of coming to the end of this. We're hoping to write up in the next few months. What does that say? It says there are 5 themes that come out of it. Bear with me, my laptop's just frozen. Can you still hear me? Okay. Yeah, everyone's nodding. That's good. It just means that my screen's frozen. So there are 5 themes coming out. So number 1, agility. So how do we make it easier for people to get the skills they need to work across councils and across local government organisations? Secondly, alignment. How do we align local government with other parts of the system rather than competing for talent? How do we work together so that we put the people in the right place? Thirdly, ability and skills. So particularly around digital skills, we'll come back to that, but also leadership management skills are seen as absolutely fundamental to the future. So how do we develop those? How do we address attraction and retention to make local government a really exciting career pathway that people want to come into and stay? And then leadership, how do people managers give leaders the right support to develop and stick to workforce strategies, which are often longer than time horizons of politics? Now, you'll see from that we couldn't come up with a 5th one that began with an A, but I'm going to briefly go through each one of those in turn. So first of all, agility. Now, the traditional career path for local government is very much like the traditional career path in a lot of sectors. You come in as a specialist in something, you have talent in it, you progress through the ranks in doing that. So you're brilliant at planning or environmental health or technology, so you get promoted and ultimately end up as a manager in that and a leader. And the responses we got back to the survey and to our questions were that there's more of a desire for a flexible skill set so people can move around, can take advantage of their skills in different parts of a council or a combined authority or wherever they are, and do things which aren't their day job. Now, that's partly to do with helping switch roles to be more flexible about filling capacity gaps or capability gaps, but also about how do we create attractive places for people to work. I'll come back to this later, but we know that particularly for younger workers coming into the workforce, one of the key reasons they move out of it again or out of an employer is because they don't feel they get variety or challenge in what they do. So how do we create the environment in which we can create agility? Now that sort of begs some questions for people managers, HR professionals. So what does it mean for processes and job descriptions and role profiles, which have tended to be quite rigid and very kind of laid down and templated? How do you move towards more generic skill sets? And how do you know which skills different employees have and where they might like to work to encourage them to move around? And then what are your employment models that facilitate that? How do you know where people have been, what the skills they've got, how you might redeploy them? And um, one of the things we're seeing in other sectors is a much greater focus on skills profiling of the workforce. So including central government who are investing in something called Skills Campus, which is effectively mapping the skills of all civil servants and putting a core curriculum in. So those flexible skills are developed from the outset of people joining the organisation and people are moved around. I guess as with most of these themes, there are overlaps between doing this and attraction and retention. But how do we, as people managers, think about the workforce not as a set of technical specialists in a silo, but a set of skills that can be moved around and can flex and vary over time to address the pressures in the workforce? So that is theme number one. Theme number two is alignment. So we went into this asking largely about integrated healthcare and what that meant for the workforce in the future and how that might be more complex or difficult working across workforce boundaries. But what's interesting is that what came out of that questioning largely transcended the integrated question. So there are a few stats on this. So 45% of people on the survey said that political instability was the biggest impact on the workforce strategy. And then alignment on outcomes and cost efficiency were seen as the biggest challenges to delivering the workforce strategy. Now, what that means fundamentally is that even before you get into how you align with different organizations, there is an alignment within the organization across politicians and strategic leaders about where you are going and how you stick to a strategy around the workforce through crises and hold that long-term vision. So what does that mean for people managers? In fact, how can we as professionals help senior leaders to think in a stable, long-term way around that, to hold to a vision, to commit to it? And then alongside that, how can you build the talent pool that supports that workforce strategy? So how do you work with partners? So care would be one, but equally with education, with other public sector bodies, with the private sector, so that you are developing the people that you need to fulfill that strategy. So that kind of second point on this slide, building a sector-wide talent pool, thinking about mentoring, thinking about promoting people with the skills that you need. And then the third thing that came out was that tension around integrated care. And that was largely not as much of a challenge as we expected to come out. It was clear that there are some bits where NHS and LA and local authorities are not aligned on it, but there was a sense of pragmatism about getting that to work, which was really, really, really important. So that alignment point really changed from where we started the research to where we ended it. But it became much more about how do you create a coherent system with a long-term strategy and the skills to back it up, rather than just about cross-organisation working. Theme 3, ability and skills. So I guess it's no surprise that one of the things top in people's heads was Gen AI and artificial intelligence and the impact of digital technology. So digital skills for the whole workforce came out very strongly in this part of the questioning. In another part of what I do, I actually run a digital skills program for the civil service, which is training senior leaders. And there's a real sense across the public sector that all people, particularly those outside of digital and technologies teams, need to understand the fundamentals of digital. So how do you work with data? How do you work with AI? How do you use user-led design techniques? And we absolutely hear that not just across government, but across our client base in the private sector as well. Now, that means, though, rethinking a bit how that learning is delivered. So it requires, because it's such a broad-based skill, you can't invest heavily in really comprehensive learning. It's about how do you build fluency? How do you have a broad-based program that allows people to choose their pathway, to get the learning they want at the point in time where they want it, and then to really specialize if they need to. So that's the kind of whole workforce view. We also asked what skills and abilities leaders would need in future. Now, to some extent, we asked a cross section of people who are really focused on people management what was important, and what we got back was a number of people skills. So, top three: developing the organization, championing change, and aligning people. So, three real strong people elements. What I would say is that actually aligns with some research we did with Oxford Said University on the importance of people in transformational change, which said that the majority of transformation programs where they fail not because of technology or process or project management. They fail because organizations aren't aligned, people aren't behind it, they're not effectively led. So you really need to think about that kind of leadership development for your people. And what always occurs to me about local government and the sector more generally is that it invests less in its leaders than civil service or policing or lots of private sector organizations. So classically, people are promoted for their technical skills and then expected to learn how to lead on the job. That I think there's a real thing for some of the big overarching sector bodies to look at leadership programs and how they can be more mainstreamed and delivered. Attraction and retention. I'm not going to dwell on this one really because it's one of your top current issues. I'm sure you get sick about talking about it. So there are specific attract issues and specific skill sets where you're being competed with, not by other parts of the public sector, but actually by some private sector retail type roles. I think the ones that are worth dwelling on a little bit are younger employees. So we've seen, particularly we work with a number of rural authorities where they are really struggling to retain younger employees who move out of the area. The profile of the local government workforce is aging, and the younger people coming into the workforce want slightly different things than maybe they wanted 10, 15, 20 years ago. So there's a real need to kind of think about that career pathway, thinking about how you really make the story about purpose and vision and impact compelling to those people, and how you help them to build more flexible career pathways, which again overlaps with the agility point earlier. So thinking differently about that workforce attraction and career structure will be essential to addressing that challenge. And then the last theme is around leadership more generally. Now, I think there are few things in this which are really quite difficult to crack. So one is leaders struggle to develop the capability. So you will have all seen leadership programs which get not very much traction because the actual leaders don't have the time to carve out in their day job to actually go to it. So I think that's about how do we think about a different model of learning for those people, like more bite-sized, less going to a classroom for a day. How do we think about kind of giving them giving them the space to do it, not feeling like they're stepping out of the business and creating problems, but actually feeling like an investment in the future business. So I think there are some real kind of tactical things that we're hoping to dig into in the next phase of work about what you could do with that. The next point that comes out is that future leaders are not necessarily going to need the same skills that they need now. So there is a much more dealing with ambiguity type of mindset here. So how do leaders encourage their organization to innovate? How do they encourage them to do things day to day in a different way rather than simply running the sausage machine? How do they drive pace of change and kind of create a vision which is compelling and brings the workforce with them? So there's a slight, well, maybe not much, but a slightly different skill set in the future. And then that transition from specialist to enterprise leader, which I've mentioned a couple of times, is a different skill set fundamentally. So often we see people who are really brilliant. Actually, let me give you a really tangible example of that. So working with another client, there's a guy who had been working in housing for best part of a decade, was really brilliant, but was not going to progress any further because there was nowhere further to progress in his area. However, that organization put him in charge of technology. They didn't know much about technology. It wasn't his core specialism, but what he had were the management skills to go in and lead that as a bit of business. So how do you transition from people who feel, or maybe I've got as far as I can here, to feel I've got a set of skills and I can use them to help grow the organization and transform further elsewhere? Emerging from all this are four key challenges, really. So one is about workforce planning. So how do we know what skills we're going to need in the future, and how do we plan to recruit, retain, upskill to get there? One is that question about how do you reskill and upskill, particularly in new skills like digital. One of them is about how you get leadership models which are more flexible and move things around and enable people to move around. And then one is about how do you remove process barriers to addressing these challenges day to day. I've talked for longer than I intended to talk, but I'm really happy to take questions and have a bit of a discussion in the last 5 minutes. But equally, I really love it if more of you kind of reached out and got involved. I'm going to take the slides off the screen so I can see you.
Okay, so I'm going to try and help to encourage some of those questions. I think also just thinking about the challenges we were talking about before, and how that is going to impact and change even the research that Graeme has been looking at. How are we going to do that onboarding? How are we going to continue to attract the right people and ensure that, everything that needs to happen in that probationary period does happen, and be sort of looking forward and preparing for that is probably going to be one of our biggest and significant challenges that we'll face. I've not seen anything in the chat. Oh,
Sarah's got a hand up.
yeah, so there's an email address in the chat from Graeme if anybody else would like to make contributions. Sorry, there's a hand up. Sarah Bennington Cox.
Can you hear me?
We can.
And Sarah.
Oh, good. Yeah, I suppose really the one thing that sort of interested me more than anything is the different leadership models and what we can do to improve our organisation. Now, we've been doing quite a bit of work on this in the last 18 months, something like that. And we started off with a 1-day course. And yes, we were encouraging people to leave their workplaces and spend time in a training room with people, and sort of pick up what they could, what the real skills are for managing people and building leadership. So we were saying to them, we've asked you to stop being managers. We're asking you now to be leaders. So we're actually redirecting you now. Let's talk about it. And what we've done is we've tried to encourage people to join action learning sets. So it's what we do is the 6 steps to effective leadership and management is we run an action learning set for each of those essential skills that we talk about. But that is when they start talking about the real stuff. It's how all this theory and concept we're talking about, how can we bring about change within our own teams? And it's a private and confidential space to talk and to get advice and to learn from each other. And the one thing that we said to them at the the end of the very first action learning set, by the way, you're actually doing what you're paid to do now. We want you to people manage. We want you to do less of the doing and more of the people management. And you could see the penny dropping with people. So the point is, although it's a small cohort at the moment, considering the numbers we've trained, those are the people who come back to each of those workshops. And our L&D trainer is brilliant. She's been encouraging the individuals to talk and to really think about the difference. And I think the message is slowly getting across that people, and I think the biggest issue we've had is we've had the technical expertise or experts appointed as people managers, and it's a different job. It's like landing on the moon. It's a different area to work in, and we've got to give people that kind of support. I think really there is a better awareness now, and people are realizing management is very, very different, and they are realizing they've got to tackle the issues that they might have to deal with. Whereas I think some people who might not have gone on the program are sitting there and sort of thinking, well, if I just ignore it, that problem might go away, and it doesn't. It just becomes bigger, doesn't it? So, I mean, that's my two penneth, really. I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to encourage people to be the managers that we want, be the leaders we want them to be.
Yeah, absolutely love to hear that, Sarah. And it sounds like you're going about it the right way, because I think absolutely that blend of learning, action learning sets, a bit of coaching, ongoing focus on it is the way that you make that change. And actually, some of that change is not about learning new skills; it's about forgetting old ones. It's about them not feeling they have to be the absolute nailed on technical expert in everything. Their job is slightly different now.
If you don't mind me saying as well, that I think there's the opportunity, certainly with us getting together in PPMA, there's lots of webinars, there's actually a lot of leadership programs and things like that. There's something about consistency across the public sector and actually embracing that collective sharing of knowledge and learning. I would encourage colleagues to think about that also, to think about the programs and to very widely share, as members, the benefits of being able to attend these sessions, the virtual ones. They're usually monthly, really, really wide range of topics. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a vice president. I think it really has got value when we get together. You see that at the virtual conference. You also see that at the in-person conferences too. I think the sort of energy that inspires us to have, it really helps, because it is sometimes quite hard and quite difficult, and it's great that we are able to kind of face these challenges together, because they're more or less the same or very similar, right across the country. So am I handing over, because I know we're at that final point before lunchtime,
We've
and
got a couple of minutes, Sandra, and we've got 2 or 3 questions still in the
oh,
chat
I beg your
room.
pardon, in the chat.
No, it's fine.
Let me just go back to the chat then. My apologies.
No.
There is a question from, is that Lucy, asking what sort of flexible career pathways can local authorities think about introducing to attract a younger workforce over the next 10 years?
So that's a big question to answer in probably 90 seconds. So I probably won't try. I think but what I'll do is I'll follow up on that afterwards, if that's okay. But I think it's about how do you take a skills view to it? How do you rotate people around the organization at every stage of their development so they get a broad experience? And then as they move up, how do you give them the opportunity to manage and develop in different areas, so that they get the leadership skills they want to progress? And I don't think it's all about flexible career pathways. A lot of it's about purpose and vision and making an impact for younger people entering the workforce. I'm really happy to follow up on that separately. Well, I just canter through the other questions that are popping up as well.
Yeah, sure.
How do you encourage those reluctant managers to engage? What you need is the very top of the organization to sponsor your leadership and management programs. Like, the best ones are sponsored by the top, and it's seen as the way this organization does business. If you're trying to push from the bottom up, it becomes really, really hard to get people to engage. Do we focus too much on someone's technical ability or even performance outcomes instead of how they motivate, inspire, and lead teams? Candidly, I think yes. I think you could do more to think about skills assessment of those things and kind of leadership models and having some of the kind of quantitative metrics about how people lead and sharing that across the organization to help them embed and adapt to the culture as well.
So we are actually at
We
time.
are out of time. There's some more questions as well.
There's a couple of other questions, but we could potentially go back and answer those separately. I think please do get in touch with Graeme, make those contributions, have those conversations, and let's get more into the research.